This human soldier may look fragile, small, and out of place, but that's not what you think, because the galaxy's deadliest hive is about to take orders from her. Lisa Bennett steps onto Outpost Century and the laughs start. They call her soft, slow, a lucky monkey with a badge. She says nothing. She's pushed into the Beastmaster track, the place for recruits who are expected to fail. Then she meets the Nexus Stalker, a shadow with 6 burning eyes, and it looks back at her like it understands. The joke dies on their lips. If this new way isn't done right, life support fails, sectors go dark, and the station suffocates. The Scourge win, the Alliance breaks, and humanity's name turns to ash. ChatGPT said Lisa Bennett took a deep breath as the ship docked at Outpost Century. The metal walkway hissed open, and the air smelled sharp and cold, filled with something strange she couldn't name. Every step echoed. Waiting in the docking bay were officers from different species, their eyes full of curiosity, amusement, and thinly hidden disdain. The first human in the Galactic Alliance Defense Force, and already a joke to them. Commander Zelthar stood tall among them, his scales shifting from blue to purple as he spoke. So this is the human recruit? The laughter that followed cut deep, but Lisa stood straight, her voice steady as she saluted. "Recruit Lisa Bennett, reporting for duty, sir." He smirked, replying, "At ease, human. I understand your kind lacks proper military experience." The laughter returned, but Lisa didn't flinch. She was sent to the Beastmaster Division, the lowest post in the Alliance. Everyone knew it was where careers went to die. Handling dangerous creatures instead of commanding troops, working with beasts instead of soldiers. A clear message: the human was a novelty, not a real warrior. As Officer Vale guided her through the long metal corridors, other crew members stared openly. Some whispered. Some laughed. "No claws, no armor, no chance," one alien said. Lisa kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight. Vale glanced at her with a faint smile. "You'll need a thick skin here," she said softly. Or scales. The air grew heavier as they reached the lower decks. The scent of disinfectant and wild things hung in the air. Behind thick glass and force fields were creatures unlike anything from Earth. Massive predators, strange eyes, claws, teeth, and armor-like hides. "These are our battle creatures," Vale explained. "Weapons of war, trained for combat and control." Lisa nodded quietly, her gaze moving from one enclosure to the next. She felt small among these monsters, but also drawn to them. Then she saw it. In the last chamber, darkness moved. 6 glowing eyes opened, burning like distant suns. The Nexus Stalker. The creature everyone feared. Its black, scaled body shimmered with deadly grace as it stepped forward. Lisa froze. The Stalker stopped too, staring straight at her. The two of them, prey and predator, human and monster, locked eyes through the barrier. In that silent moment, Lisa felt something unexpected, not fear, but recognition. A spark of understanding. The others might have laughed at her weakness, but the galaxy's deadliest predator didn't. ChatGPT said 2 days passed, and the whispers around the station grew louder. The human recruit had survived her first days in the Beastmaster Division, something few expected. Most thought she'd quit or end up in the medical wing, but every morning Lisa showed up on time, quiet and focused. She cleaned, observed, and followed every rule. She didn't fight the mockery. She saved her strength. The others called her soft, slow, the pet feeder. What they didn't notice was how the Nexus Stalker had started watching her every move. During her first supervised shift, Captain Wells decided to make an example of her. He called her out in front of the other handlers, his voice echoing across the arena. "Show us your human methods," he said with a mocking smile. They released a smaller creature, a Savla hound, known for its temper and armored hide. It charged. The others expected screams. Instead, Lisa knelt, lowered her gaze, and stayed perfectly still. The beast hesitated, confused. "Enough games!" Wells barked, shocking it with a neural pulse. The hound turned wild again, slashing across Lisa's arm. Blood ran down her sleeve, but she didn't move. She whispered one word, calm, steady, commanding, and to everyone's shock, the creature stopped. It backed away, trembling, as if her voice alone had broken its fury. Officer Vale stepped in before it could continue. "That's enough," she snapped. Medical officers rushed to Lisa's side, but she refused to leave. Even hurt, she stood tall, meeting the captain's eyes without a word. Later, as she got her wound sealed, Vale approached her quietly. "You didn't freeze," she said. "You read it." "You understood it." Lisa only shrugged. "Back on Earth, we learned that fear feeds predators. Stay calm, and they hesitate." That night, long after the others had gone, Lisa returned to the creature bays. The lights were dim, the air cold and still. Inside his enclosure, the Nexus stalker waited, its 6 eyes gleaming. Lisa didn't know why she came. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. But when she stepped closer, it didn't roar or lunge. It only watched her. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, very slowly, Lisa whispered, "You're not a monster, are you?" The creature tilted its head, studying her. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the first hint of trust forming. Fragile, dangerous, but real. And in that silent connection, everything began to change. Days turned into weeks, and Lisa's quiet routine became something extraordinary. Every morning she worked in the beast quarters under senior handler Pax, cleaning enclosures, checking systems, and preparing food. Most handlers still avoided her. Some laughed when they thought she couldn't hear. "The humans talking to the monsters again," they said. But Lisa didn't care. Each day she visited the Nexus stalker, the creature they called untamable. And every day it grew calmer around her. At first, she kept her distance, speaking softly through the containment field. Then, one night, she lowered the barrier's strength by a fraction, just enough to let her hand pass through. Her heart raced, knowing she could be court-martialed or worse. But the stalker didn't attack. Instead, it stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until its cold, scaled snout brushed her palm. The touch sent a shock through her, not of fear but connection. Its eyes locked on hers, 6 glowing orbs filled with intelligence. Lisa smiled. "You're not what they think you are," she whispered. "And neither am I." From that night on, she called it Shadow, though only in secret. Each visit, she taught it small signals, hand gestures, tone changes, rewards. No pain, no force, just trust. Slowly, the creature began to respond, lowering its head when she spoke, waiting for her permission to eat. Officer Vale started to notice. She never said anything, just watched quietly as the creature's behavior changed. The Nexus stalker, once a symbol of chaos and death, now followed patterns, calm, focused, aware. Still, others refused to believe it. Captain Wells mocked her whenever he passed. "Training bedtime stories, human?" he sneered. But the laughter was softer now, uneasy, because even they could see it. The stalker no longer roared at her approach. It watched her instead, waiting. Lisa didn't need their approval. She knew what was happening. Trust was forming, slow and fragile, like dawn breaking over a dark world, and soon the whole station would see it too. ChatGPT said the warning sirens came without mercy. Red lights flashed through the corridors, and the air filled with the sound of shouting. The scourge had come. Every officer, every handler, every creature on Outpost Century felt the tremor of the attack. Commander Zelthar's voice echoed through the comms. "All battle units to deployment zones! Defend the station at all costs!" Chaos followed. Handlers scrambled to attach neural harnesses to the battle beasts, forcing them into obedience with pain and fear. The creatures fought back, snapping and roaring, their training breaking under panic. Lisa stood before Shadow's enclosure, the neural harness in her hands. Senior handler Pax barked at her, "Get that thing ready for combat, Bennett." "That's an order." But she knew what would happen. The moment the harness touched him, Shadow would turn savage again. "He won't fight with this," Lisa said, her voice firm. Pax didn't listen. He stormed off to deal with the others, leaving her behind. Another explosion rocked the floor, and Officer Vale appeared beside her, her weapon drawn. "Sectors 5 and 9 are breached. Life support's at risk," she shouted. Lisa's mind raced. If Sector 9 fell, half the station would suffocate. There wasn't time to argue. She turned to Vale. "I can make him fight, but not with pain. I need to do it my way." Vale hesitated, eyes flicking to the massive creature pacing in the shadows. Then she nodded. "Do it. I'll cover you." Lisa lowered the containment field, her hands shaking. For the first time, Shadow stepped free. No restraints, no barriers, just trust. The alien soldiers would have called it madness. But when Lisa gave a single hand signal, Shadow moved beside her, silent, focused, ready. Together they ran into the smoke-filled corridors, the air shaking with gunfire and screams. When they turned a corner and met the Scourge face to face, Lisa didn't shout or hide. She raised her hand, gave the signal, and Shadow leapt. In seconds, the raiders were down. Officer Vale stood frozen, stunned by what she'd seen. Lisa didn't smile or celebrate. She just looked ahead at the burning halls. "Come on," she said quietly. "We're not done yet." And the monster followed her command. ChatGPT said they pushed deeper into the chaos. Smoke filled the corridors, the walls cracked from explosions, and the alarms screamed nonstop. Everywhere they turned, Scourge raiders tore through defenses, metallic monsters with red eyes and weapons that cut through armor like paper. Officer Vale and Captain Wells joined Lisa near the life support control sector, their faces tense. Wells was bleeding from one arm, the stone of his body cracked, but he still aimed his weapon with steady hands. "We're surrounded," he said. "They've cut off the main route. We won't hold for long." Lisa's eyes went to Shadow. The creature stood still beside her, scanning every shadow, every sound. "Yes, we will," she said quietly. She made a small signal and Shadow moved, fast and silent as a whisper. He climbed the walls, vanishing into the darkness above. The Scourge didn't even see him until it was too late. One by one, he dropped from the ceiling, claws slicing through metal and flesh. Lisa shouted commands, short and clear, and Shadow obeyed instantly. Officer Vale covered their flanks, firing precise bursts while Wells dragged a wounded soldier to safety. Within minutes, the corridor fell silent except for the hiss of sparking wires. Wells stared at the creature, his usual arrogance gone. "How?" he asked, breathless. "How is it following you?" "No control chip, no pain link." Lisa met his eyes. "I don't force him," she said. "I ask him." For the first time, the captain had no words. He only nodded and reloaded his weapon. They moved together through the next sectors, clearing enemies one room at a time. Each time, Lisa gave hand signals, and Shadow struck with impossible precision, protecting her, shielding Vale, flanking enemies before they even saw him. The stories spread fast through the comms. "The human has tamed the stalker," soldiers whispered. "It's fighting for her." Commander Zelthar saw the live feeds and could hardly believe his eyes. "No neural harness?" "Impossible," he muttered. But impossible or not, it was happening. By the time the battle reached its peak, the Scourge were breaking. Raiders fled to their boarding pods, chased by fear and confusion. At the final corridor, Lisa, Vale, and Wells faced a dozen enemies blocking the exit. "We can't let them escape," Lisa said. "If they leave, they'll come back with reinforcements." She turned to Shadow. "Now, partner!" With a deep growl, the creature surged forward, faster than any weapon. The fight was brutal but short. When the last raider fell, the corridor went still. Smoke drifted in the air, glowing red under the emergency lights. Lisa stood beside her blood-smeared ally, breathing hard. Shadow lowered his head beside her, waiting. Wells looked at her with something new in his eyes, respect. "You and that thing just saved this station," he said quietly. Lisa shook her head. "Not a thing," she said. "A soldier." And for the first time in the history of the Galactic Alliance, the deadliest predator in the galaxy stood beside a human, by choice. ChatGPT said, 2 days later, the fires were out, the alarms silent, and Outpost Century floated in uneasy peace. The Scourge were gone. Repairs stretched through every corridor, crews patching metal and sealing ruptures, but the talk across the station wasn't about the damage. It was about the human and the monster who had saved them. Lisa Bennett stood in the main conference hall, her uniform torn, her arm still bandaged, and beside her was Shadow, the Nexus stalker, free, unchained, calm. Every eye in the room watched in disbelief. Commander Zelthar's scales shimmered a deep blue as he addressed the gathered officers. "The Scourge attack could have destroyed this station," he said. "But it did not, because of courage and because of something none of us expected." He gestured toward Lisa and Shadow. A human recruit and the creature we once called uncontrollable fought side by side. Captain Wells, his repaired stone arm glinting under the lights, stepped forward. "I saw it myself," he said. "No neural control. No psionic link." That predator followed her orders as if it understood every word. His tone carried no mockery now, only respect. Lisa spoke simply. "On Earth, we learn to work with predators, not break them. Force makes enemies. Trust makes allies. Shadow didn't obey me out of fear. He chose to fight with me." The hall fell silent. Officer Vale broke it first. "Her methods are strange," she said, "but they work. Maybe it's time we stopped calling it training and started calling it partnership." Zelthar's eyes narrowed in thought, then softened. "Perhaps we have underestimated humans," he said. He turned to Lisa. "You are promoted to specialist. You will build a new program for the Beastmaster Division, one that follows your methods." The room erupted in murmurs. A human leading training? Unheard of. But no one argued. They had seen what she could do. Later, as Lisa walked back to her new quarters, Shadow padded beside her, silent but alert. Crew members stepped aside as they passed, but now their faces showed awe, not fear. Vale smiled faintly. "They used to laugh at you," she said. "Now they just don't know what to think." Lisa touched Shadow's scaled head. "They'll learn," she replied softly. "We all will." Shadow rumbled deep in his chest, a low sound that wasn't a growl, something closer to a purr. The predator who once killed without thought now guarded her side. The weak human, they had called her. Not anymore. Weeks passed, and Outpost Century began to change. The laughter that once followed Lisa through the corridors had vanished. Now, when she walked with Shadow at her side, officers straightened their posture and lowered their voices. The humans were no longer the fragile newcomers. They were something else now, something the galaxy hadn't expected. Lisa spent her days training new handlers. The old Beastmaster program was gone. In its place, the Partnership Division was born. Officers came from every species, curious but wary. They watched as she demonstrated her methods. Clear gestures, steady tone, no control harnesses. Some were skeptical at first, but when a creature twice their size responded to her calm command, they began to listen. "You don't need to dominate them," she told her trainees. "You just need to be understood." Captain Wells himself attended her first session. The same man who had mocked her months ago now stood at the edge of the arena, taking notes. Afterward, he approached her. "Your way is slower," he said, "but it lasts." Lisa smiled. "Because it's not about obedience," she replied. "It's about trust." He nodded once. "You've changed more than just a creature, Specialist Bennett. You've changed how we think." That night, she sat in her quarters beside Shadow. The station lights dimmed to the night cycle, casting everything in soft blue. The massive predator rested near her bed, his 6 eyes half closed. Outside, repair ships drifted by, patching the scars of war. Lisa looked out the window, then down at her companion. "They said we didn't belong here," she whispered. Shadow opened one eye and gave a low, contented growl. Lisa smiled. "But now they'll remember us. The human and the monster who proved that strength isn't just power. It's understanding." And somewhere deep in the station's heart, a new era had begun, where fear turned into respect. And the galaxy's greatest predator took orders not from fear, but from trust. ChatGPT said, months later, Outpost Century no longer felt like the same cold fortress where Lisa Bennett had first arrived. The walls that once echoed with laughter and doubt now carried something new: pride. Her training program had spread far beyond the station. Reports came in from other outposts, from colonies on distant moons, from ships patrolling the void. Handlers were copying her methods, working with their beasts instead of forcing them into submission. Success rates soared and fatal training incidents dropped to almost zero. Lisa watched the change unfold quietly. She didn't seek attention, but her name traveled fast. Humans, once dismissed as weak, were suddenly seen as innovators, a species that could turn predators into partners. Commander Zelthar even visited one of her training sessions. His scaled face, once filled with mockery, now showed something rare for his kind: respect. "You've done more than prove your worth," he told her. "You've reshaped the Alliance's future." But even as the station celebrated, Lisa knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and not every creature, not every commander would accept her way so easily. Shadows of war still lingered at the edge of known space, and the scourge threat had not vanished completely. Yet this time, humanity wasn't a helpless newcomer. They had earned their place through trust, courage, and understanding. One evening, Lisa stood by the viewing deck, watching the stars shimmer across the endless black. Shadow stood beside her, silent and calm. His reflection glowed faintly in the glass, a reminder of what no one thought possible, a human and an apex predator, united by something greater than power. She reached out, resting her hand gently on his scaled shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. Shadow gave a soft rumble in reply, low and steady like distant thunder. Lisa smiled. "And next time," she said, her eyes fixed on the stars, "they won't just call me human, they'll call me Commander." And for the first time in the galaxy's long memory, that didn't sound impossible. ChatGPT said, a year later, Outpost Century had become the heart of a quiet revolution. What began as a single act of trust had changed the entire Galactic Alliance. Now, stations across the Outer Rim trained under the Bennett Protocol, a system built on cooperation rather than control. No longer were beasts treated as disposable weapons. They were teammates, respected, understood, and deadly in their own right. Lisa stood on the command balcony, wearing the insignia of a full officer, the youngest in Alliance history. Below her, trainees from 10 different species worked with their assigned creatures. The air no longer smelled of fear or cruelty, but of discipline and unity. Officer Vale joined her, smiling. "Remember when you first arrived?" she asked. "They said you wouldn't last a week." Lisa chuckled softly. "They weren't entirely wrong," she replied. But Shadow had other plans. As if hearing his name, the massive Nexus stalker appeared from the far end of the training floor. The crowd parted without a word. He moved gracefully toward Lisa, the living symbol of what the New Age stood for. When he stopped at her side, every handler bowed slightly, not out of fear, but respect. Commander Zelthar entered the hall soon after. His voice echoed across the chamber. "Specialist, no, Commander Bennett," he said, his tone deep with pride. "The Council has reviewed your methods. The Alliance will be adopting the Bennett Protocol fleet-wide. You have changed what it means to command." Lisa felt the weight of those words settle in her chest. A year ago, they had laughed when she saluted. Now they saluted her. That night, alone in her quarters, she sat beside Shadow as he rested. The stars shimmered beyond the viewport. "We did more than survive," she whispered. "We changed them." Shadow opened his eyes, their glow soft and calm. He rumbled, almost like a purr, as she leaned against his armored flank. Outside, the stars burned brighter, and in the quiet hum of the station, a new legend was born. The human who taught the galaxy that even monsters could learn to trust. Years passed, and the legend of Lisa Bennett spread far beyond Outpost Century. Her name became a symbol across the Galactic Alliance, not just of bravery, but of change. Entire fleets adopted her training philosophy. On worlds where humans had once been dismissed as frail and impulsive, her story was now studied in military academies. Young recruits, and of every species, repeated her mantra, "Respect earns loyalty. Fear earns rebellion." Outpost Century itself was transformed. Once a remote frontier base, it had become the Alliance's main training hub for human-led partnership units. The corridors that once echoed with mockery were now filled with students learning how to communicate with predators, empathic drones, and synthetic minds. Each of them carried a small crest, a silhouette of a human hand resting on the head of a six-eyed creature, the emblem of trust. Lisa, now Commander Bennett, walked the halls with quiet confidence. The years had etched lines of experience into her face, but her eyes still held that same steady light, calm, thoughtful, human. Shadow remained always at her side, still powerful, still watchful, though streaks of silver now glinted in his scales. Wherever they went, silence followed. Not fear, but reverence. One evening, as she reviewed reports from distant stations, Officer Vale entered her quarters. "The Scourge have stirred again," she said softly. "A new fleet near the outer rim. Command wants your counsel." Lisa looked up from her data pad, her expression unreadable. "Then it's time," she replied. "Prepare the units." Later that night, Lisa stood on the observation deck, watching ships rise into the void. Hundreds of them, each carrying humans and creatures working side by side. She felt Shadow press close to her, his breath deep and steady. "They laughed at us once," she murmured, her voice soft but certain. "But now, they follow our lead." The stars stretched endlessly ahead, and as the fleet accelerated into the dark, Lisa smiled faintly. The galaxy had learned the lesson she'd fought so hard to prove, that the greatest strength wasn't domination, but connection. And under the endless shimmer of the cosmos, the human and the predator stood together, commander and partner, ready once again to face whatever the dark would send their way. Decades passed, and time reshaped the galaxy once again. The Scourge Wars became history lessons, the kind spoken of in quiet awe, stories of the human commander and her shadow who changed how the stars waged war. Children across the colonies grew up hearing her name. Lisa Bennett, the woman who tamed the untamable, who proved that trust could turn monsters into protectors. On Outpost Century, now renamed Fort Bennett, statues lined the main concourse, memorials to the first Alliance partnership units. At the center stood the largest monument of all, a figure of a human reaching out to touch the muzzle of a six-eyed creature, frozen forever in that first moment of connection. Veterans and new recruits alike would pause there before deployments, laying their hands on the base for luck. Lisa herself had retired from command, her hair now streaked with gray. But she remained on the station, serving as an advisor and teacher. Her days were quieter, filled with reflection. Shadow, still alive thanks to careful genetic care and regeneration treatments, rested near her quarters, his massive body curled beneath soft lighting. Though slower now, his eyes were bright, filled with the same awareness as the day they first met. One night, as the stars shimmered beyond the viewport, Lisa sat beside him and spoke softly. "Do you remember, old friend?" she said. "They called me weak. They said you couldn't be trusted. And now," she gestured toward the sky, where countless ships bearing the partnership emblem drifted through the darkness. "Now they build their fleets in our image." Shadow rumbled low, the sound vibrating through the floor, a deep, familiar comfort. Lisa smiled, resting her hand against his scaled snout. "We showed them that strength doesn't come from fear," she whispered. "It comes from understanding." The old predator blinked once, slowly, as if he agreed. Outside, the stars burned brighter than ever, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was at peace. Lisa closed her eyes, her hand still resting on the creature that had once been her test, her ally, her friend. And in that stillness, the story that began with laughter ended with legacy. A legacy written not in conquest, but in trust. ChatGPT said years later, long after Commander Lisa Bennett's passing, her name still echoed through every corridor of the Galactic Alliance. Her portrait hung in academies across 100 worlds, her story taught not as myth, but as the turning point of modern galactic history. The alliance that had once ruled through control now thrived through unity, every species working alongside their partner creatures. Each team built on the principles Lisa had proven with her own life. Fort Bennett had become a living memorial. The halls where laughter and scorn once followed a lone human recruit were now filled with voices speaking a dozen languages, all teaching the same lesson: strength through understanding. Statues of Shadow, the Nexus stalker who had stood beside her, watched over the central training arena. Trainees placed their hands on the base before every exercise, a ritual said to bring courage. In the archives, an old recording played on repeat. Lisa's voice, calm and steady, the one that had once silenced monsters. "Fear divides. Respect unites. When you face the dark, don't command it, understand it. That's where real power lives. Generations who had never seen her still felt as though she was speaking directly to them. Even the newest recruits, young, uncertain, and full of questions, found strength in her words. Some said that when the night cycle dimmed and the stars glowed just right, they could hear a low rumble echoing through the station's walls, like a purr beneath the metal. The sound of shadow, still watching, still guarding, and so the legend of the human and the apex predator lived on, not as a tale of war, but of evolution. In every corner of the Alliance, from glittering capital worlds to forgotten frontier outposts, beings of all kinds now worked side by side. They no longer laughed at the idea of trust between predator and prey. They honored it. The galaxy had learned its greatest lesson, that true command doesn't come from fear or force, but from connection. And as the stars turned silently above Fort Bennett, the spirit of a human and her shadow remained eternal, unbroken, and forever part of the light that guided them all. ChatGPT said. Centuries later, the story of Lisa Bennett and Shadow had become more than history. It was legend. Entire generations had grown up beneath the teachings of the Bennett Doctrine, even in distant corners of the galaxy, where the Alliance's banner flickered faintly among new empires and forgotten colonies. Her message endured. Understanding is strength. Across the stars, statues of the human commander and her six-eyed companion stood in plazas and courtyards, their faces worn smooth by time and reverence. Scholars debated the details. Was Shadow truly sentient, or was it Lisa's empathy that awakened him? Did she train him, or did they learn together? The truth hardly mattered anymore. What mattered was what they had become, a symbol that power and compassion could coexist. On Fort Bennett, now a shining city in orbit around a peaceful world, a museum preserved the last relics of that first partnership. Lisa's uniform faded but whole, a claw from Shadow, polished like obsidian. Visitors came from every world to stand in the quiet gallery where a simple plaque read, "They laughed at the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her." Even after 1,000 years, no one laughed anymore. In the great halls of the new academy, instructors began each class with the same words Lisa once spoke: "You can teach fear or you can teach trust. Only one lasts." Cadets repeated it in hundreds of languages, their voices rising together, human, alien, and hybrid alike. Outside, in the vast training domes, young recruits stood beside towering creatures, their eyes bright with respect, not control. And though ages had passed, some said that on clear nights, when the stars glimmered just right over the old outpost ruins, a faint vibration rolled through the ground, a soft rumble like a distant purr. The galaxy still remembered the bond that changed its destiny, because even time itself could not silence the truth Lisa Bennett left behind. That the smallest voice, guided by trust, can command the mightiest of monsters, and in doing so, teach an entire universe how to be better. ChatGPT said, millennia later, long after the Galactic Alliance itself had fallen and risen again under new banners, the legend of Lisa Bennett and the Nexus Stalker still lived. Civilizations had come and gone. Stars had been born, burned bright, and died. Yet on every world where intelligent life looked up at the sky and wondered about its place among the stars, her story was told, whispered in classrooms, sung by poets, etched into the very language of leadership. On a quiet, rebuilt world once known as Century, an ancient monument stood beneath twin suns. Time had worn the edges smooth, but the figures were unmistakable. A human woman standing unarmed before a creature of impossible size, her hand resting gently against its scaled head. The inscription beneath had been translated into countless languages, but its meaning never changed. Through trust, we survive. In a nearby research colony, a young student named Reluna studied the myths of early spacefaring species. She was not human. Her kind had never even met one. But Lisa Bennett's legend fascinated her. How could one person tame an apex predator without fear? She asked her mentor. The elder smiled. Because she never tried to tame it. She learned to listen. That night, Riluna gazed out at the stars, the same stars Lisa once looked upon. Somewhere, far beyond memory, dust from Outpost Century drifted through the void, carrying fragments of the old human and her shadow. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition, yet the bond they forged still shaped its people. Armies no longer chained their beasts. Empires no longer ruled through terror. Entire species now followed the Bennett principle, that to lead is to understand, not to command. And as the sun set behind the old monument, a low hum rose from the shifting winds, deep and rhythmic, almost like a purr. The air seemed to whisper an echo from a forgotten age. They laughed at her once. They never laughed again. In that quiet moment, the spirit of the human and her apex companion lived on, not as rulers, not as heroes, but as the first voices in the long history of peace. And across the eternal starlight their legacy remained, glowing softly like a heartbeat between worlds, proof that even the smallest act of trust can reshape the entire galaxy. 10,000 years later, even the stars that once lit Lisa Bennett's path had faded, reborn in new constellations. Empires had risen, fallen, and turned to dust. But the story of the human who befriended the apex predator had become something greater than myth. It had become faith. Across distant worlds, pilgrims traveled to see what was left of Fort Bennett, now a sacred site floating above a quiet planet covered in silver forests. The outpost no longer functioned as a base. It was a temple of remembrance. The central chamber, once a command hall, now held only two statues, one of a woman standing tall and calm, and one of a massive creature kneeling before her, 6 eyes carved from blue crystal that shimmered in the dim light. Priests of every species called it the first bond. They taught that long before gods. There was trust, a bond so powerful it united not just two beings, but the destiny of an entire galaxy. Children were told that when the first human touched the first predator, the stars themselves paused to listen. No one remembered the old wars or the politics of the Galactic Alliance anymore. What endured was the lesson Lisa left behind, that the universe itself obeys understanding. It was said that in the deep silence between stars, her words could still be heard. Respect creates peace. Fear creates war. Choose. And sometimes, when the night skies over the old world of Century glowed with twin moons, travelers swore they saw movement in the darkness, the outline of something vast and gentle walking beside a faint human figure. No lights, no sound, just the quiet pulse of ancient companionship moving through the mist. They said it was impossible. They said it was only a legend, but deep down, every being who looked to the stars believed the same thing, that somewhere out there, the spirit of the human and her shadow still walked together, eternal, undivided, watching over a galaxy that had finally learned the meaning of her simplest lesson. True power is not what commands others, it's what earns their trust. ChatGPT said, A million years later, even history had forgotten its name. Civilizations no longer used metal ships or spoken words. Minds had merged with light. Species had evolved beyond bodies. Yet still, somewhere within the quiet hum of the cosmos, the memory of one human and one creature lingered, faint, like an echo trapped inside the heart of the stars. No one remembered what a human truly was, or what kind of beast the Nexus Stalker had been. But the story survived, passed down not as data or scripture, but as instinct, a pulse that lived within all thinking life. It became a universal truth, a feeling that every child, every being, somehow knew even before learning to speak, that understanding was strength, and connection was survival. Entire civilizations were now built on that single principle. Empires didn't conquer, they collaborated. Artificial minds guided worlds, bonded with living species in harmony. No chains, no fear, only balance. Philosophers called it the Bennett resonance, a term for the quiet harmony that governed all intelligent life. They believed that when Lisa Bennett had placed her hand on Shadow's head for the first time, The ripple of that act never stopped. It spread across time, carried in the fabric of reality itself. And in the farthest reaches of the void, where light itself thinned into silence, an ancient energy drifted, vast, ageless, aware. Two forms shimmered within it, one small and radiant, one large and dark, their outlines forever side by side. The stars whispered their names in every frequency, Lisa and Shadow. They were no longer flesh or legend, but something eternal, guardians of a truth older than empires. And whenever a new life form looked up at its sky and wondered if trust was worth the risk, something unseen stirred in the starlight, and the answer echoed through every corner of the universe. It always is. 10 million years later, the universe itself had changed shape. Galaxies had stretched thin across the endless dark, stars born slower, dying faster. The light that once filled the cosmos now flickered like the final breaths of a long, eternal fire. Most species that once ruled the stars had long since vanished, leaving behind monuments, echoes, and songs written in particles and light. But one memory, one heartbeat, endured. It wasn't carried in words or symbols anymore. It lived in the very pattern of creation itself, woven into the laws that guided gravity and life. When a new world formed, when a new mind opened its eyes for the first time, something in its heart whispered a truth it had never been taught. Do not destroy what you can understand. Across the still galaxies, beings of energy and thought remembered a legend, the story of two forms who walked side by side before memory began. The tale said that once, long ago, a fragile being reached out to touch a monster. Instead of fear, she offered calm. Instead of control, she gave trust. And the monster, instead of killing, bowed. That moment changed everything that followed, not just for a galaxy, but for all that would ever come after. Now, long after the last sun dimmed, two shapes of light moved through the cosmic dusk. They were not bodies nor ghosts, but patterns of pure harmony. One burned bright and warm, a trace of humanity. The other shimmered vast and dark, a reflection of the creature who once guarded her. Together they drifted across the dying stars, leaving a faint golden trail that reignited whatever it touched. They did not speak, for words no longer meant anything, but their presence alone was enough to spark new beginnings in forgotten corners of space, tiny embers of life forming again. And in that quiet, at the edge of all things, the universe remembered. The fragile hand that once touched the claw, the predator that once chose to kneel, the moment when fear ended and understanding began. And even as the stars went out, one last light remained, soft, steady, and unending. The bond that changed existence itself, Lisa and Shadow, the first trust, and the last light, ChatGPT said, and then, at the very edge of eternity, when even time had begun to slow, and the final galaxies had faded into cold whispers, something extraordinary happened. Out of the darkness, where the last atoms drifted in silence, two lights stirred. One glowed like the memory of a human heartbeat, faint but constant. The other shimmered deep and vast, like the breath of an ancient predator asleep beneath the void. For eons they had wandered together, unseen and unmeasured, bound by a truth older than creation itself. When the last photon faded, when the last trace of sound vanished, the two lights met. They touched, and the touch did not end. The universe, long gone quiet, trembled once more. From that single spark, warmth bloomed again. The old laws, long frozen, stirred awake. Matter began to swirl. Energy coiled upon itself, folding, spinning, igniting. A new universe began to form, not from collision or chaos, but from connection. The first pulse of the newborn cosmos carried a rhythm, two heartbeats in harmony, one bright, one dark, one human, one beast. In the very pattern of its physics, their bond was written, the constant between gravity and light, the symmetry between fear and trust. Every star that would ever shine, every living thing that would ever breathe, carried the echo of that eternal bond. And so, When the next generation of worlds opened their eyes to the light of their suns, they would feel it too, that quiet instinct deep within their being. A memory that whispered through every species, every atom, reach out. Do not fear what you do not understand. In the beginning of this new universe, there were no gods, no war, no hate, only a single perfect truth. That understanding is creation itself. And as the stars were born once more, the cosmos carried its oldest story forward. The human and the predator walked together through the dark, and the dark learned to shine. ChatGPT said, and so, in the newborn universe, long after the ashes of the old one had vanished, the echo of that bond, the first trust, the last light, became its foundation. Galaxies began to form again, spiraling like ripples from that eternal spark. Each one glowed with a faint pattern, a rhythm that pulsed through space and time. Scientists, billions of years later, would call it the Bennett frequency, a strange, repeating resonance woven through the cosmic background, gentle, balanced, eternal. From this new dawn, new worlds arose. New life took shape. They were not human, not drained, not anything that had come before, but something entirely new. They shared no memories of Lisa Bennett or Shadow, yet somehow every living thing carried within it a deep, quiet instinct, an awareness that life was not meant to rule or conquer but to understand. Predators and prey lived in balance. Intelligent species built civilizations without domination, guided by the same resonance that had birthed them. Across countless worlds, young beings looked at the stars and felt the same question that began it all. What happens if I reach out instead of strike? And somehow, across unimaginable time, they all seemed to know the answer. For when they reached out to a stranger, a rival, a creature unlike themselves, the universe responded. Energy hummed faintly in the air, the same vibration that once bridged the space between one human and one beast. The cosmos itself approved. In the farthest corner of this new reality, where stars were still forming, two figures made of pure light flickered into being for only a heartbeat. A woman's shape, standing tall and calm, and beside her, the outline of a great creature with 6 luminous eyes. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their presence rippled across creation like a blessing. Then they were gone, leaving behind only a whisper carried by solar winds, soft but clear, echoing through every atom of existence. Trust is the first spark of life. Protect it. And so, even as galaxies grew, died, and were born again, that single truth endured, shaping every age that would ever come. The legend of the human and her shadow was no longer just a story. It had become the heartbeat of the universe itself. Billions of years later, when even this second universe had cooled and begun to fold back into its own stillness, the pulse of the Bennett frequency did not fade. It was too deeply woven into the architecture of everything that had ever been. Matter, light, thought, all carried a small remnant of that first act of understanding. In the final moments before entropy claimed even the youngest of stars, the frequency rose again, faint but clear. Every surviving consciousness, every lattice of energy that still remembered how to think, felt it as warmth rather than sound. It was not a voice, but it spoke. The bond continues. From that pulse, the cycle began once more. Space expanded, not in violence, but in harmony. The next creation would not forget its origin. Its first galaxies were born already balanced, their energy distributed like music instead of chaos. Life would emerge again, as it always did, but this time it would never need to rediscover the meaning of trust. It would know it from its first breath. At the very center of that reborn cosmos, in the cradle of its light, 2 faint silhouettes drifted, the echo of a woman and the creature that once followed her through the dark. They were no longer beings, no longer legend, but the pattern that bound all existence together. And when the first minds of the next reality opened their eyes, they didn't ask who had made them. They already knew. They felt it in their own heartbeat, in the rhythm of their suns, in the quiet voice of creation itself. The human and the shadow walk still. Where there is fear, they bring light. Where there is division, they bring understanding. And through them, the universe lives again. Lisa sat on the edge of her bed, the low hum of the station filling the quiet around her. It was hard to believe how much had changed. When she first stepped off the transport ship, they had laughed at her, a fragile human in a galaxy of giants. They called her weak, primitive, unfit for command. But now, those same voices spoke her name with respect. The door to her quarters slid open softly, and Shadow moved inside. The great Nexus stalker, once the most feared creature in the Alliance, padded forward and stopped beside her. His 6 eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. He lowered his head until it was level with hers. Lisa smiled and placed her hand on his scaled snout. The surface was cool, smooth, alive with quiet strength, power that could have destroyed her, but never would. "They laughed at us," she whispered, her voice calm and steady. "But they're not laughing anymore." Shadow's deep chest rumbled, not in threat, but in something that almost sounded like a purr. It was the sound of peace. The bond that no one believed in, the one built on trust, not fear, was now unbreakable. Outside, the station pulsed with life, the stars burning bright against the black. Lisa looked out through the window, her reflection glowing beside his. "We did it, Shadow," she said softly. "We finally belong." The creature blinked slowly, as if in agreement. Together, they watched the stars drift past. 2 unlikely allies who had proved that even the smallest act of understanding could change the course of the galaxy forever.